Welcome to Web Summit. I think it's the last day. I'm Jordan French, Grit Daily News. Big round of applause for Patty and the great team backstage. You'll never get enough praise for their work and for Web Summit, for all yourselves for attending. I feel so grateful to be here. I'm here with lovely Michelle Romanow is with us with Clearco. We'll hear from her. A lot of backstory. It's exciting. Talk about foundation. And Florian Otto is here with us with Cedar, changing the world. Perhaps we'll unpack that here in just a moment. Let's take a seat, Florian and Michelle, and certainly a lot of inquiring minds, Michelle, in this audience, and they're always thinking the question, why? A lot of startups here. They've just started their business. A lot of humans are very good at spotting issues, but not necessarily the best way to solve them. Can you explain, why do you do what you do?
Well, that is a very broad question, but I'll give you the early inspiration behind this business. So I had been a serial entrepreneur, building everything from a caviar fishery to an early e-commerce company to a app that was bought by Groupon. And when I'm 28 years old, I get asked to join the cast of the Canadian version of Shark Tank, which is called Dragon's Den. So I get invited to this show, and all I can think of, everyone's like, this is great. And I'm like, I'm the poorest and the youngest person and the least qualified person there. So I think as a result of that, I just saw things very differently. And when I sat there as an investor, the first time not being an entrepreneur, what I was hearing is, the pitches very differently. All these founders were coming saying, look, I'm looking for $100,000 and I'm willing to give away 10% of my business. And when you ask those founders what they needed the money for, it was almost always the same two things. It was customer acquisition, which is today Facebook and Google Ads, and then it was inventory. And the other way to think about it is, why were founders using the most expensive capital in the world, which is always equity, where you give up a piece of your company and a piece of control, to do something with a fixed return? So I came back to the show the next day. I said, look, I'm going to try a new deal type. I'll give you that same $100,000, and instead of taking 10% of your business that'll own forever, I just want 10% of your revenue until you pay me back my capital plus 6%. People were confused that this was a loan. This wasn't a loan because I wasn't going to take your company if you didn't pay me back, and there was no fixed timeline or compounding interest or personal guarantee. And that's really what became Clearco. So that was the early inspiration behind it. We have now invested more than $2.5 billion into 6,000 different companies. We'll write checks anywhere from $10,000 all the way up to $10 million. And it started originally with that moment on the show.
And these are certainly some big numbers. Funding $2.5 billion is what you just said. And it's a bit meta, but you also raised money recently.
Yeah.
Yourself, a somewhat traditional way, though.
We did. Our latest investors were SoftBank. We were their first Canadian company that they've invested in. And look, if there was the Clearco for Clearco, if I didn't have to give up dilution by building this company, I would do that. But that's just an option that doesn't exist, and that's really why we're building it.
Certainly, we'll get to some of the metrics a little later in this talk about funding in 21 minutes versus what you just said was 4 months, right, to close this most round. It's a very different paradigm between one and the other. We'll get to those mechanics in a moment. But Florian, your story also, it resonates with a lot of people because they often find a passion or a specific incident happens that spurs something. You, like perhaps quite a few in the audience, at ZocDocs, you were an employee, not necessarily a founder, didn't necessarily even see yourself doing something like that, but then something happened. Tell us.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So what happened back in 2015, my wife fainted on the street in New York. I need to go to the doctor, got extremely great medical care. And then afterwards, the billing nightmare started. So she got a stack of papers with codes to pay. She didn't really understand that. She literally needed to log into a portal that gave 24 hours later her a security code in order to log in and pay the bill. Got another bill a month later, and then half a year later, a debt collector called her for a bill she never received. So it was a complete nightmare. And we basically really thought about, okay, what is the fundamental problem here? My wife said, okay, she lost trust in the entire hospital because the billing experience was bad, although the medical experience was extremely good. And it makes sense because trust is consistency over time, and this entire experience was not consistent. And the expectations that she had almost anywhere from, for example, booking your flight on Expedia or Kayak, or shopping on Amazon, watching Netflix. The discrepancy between that experience and what she really got on the hospital was extremely wide. So I said, okay, we should be able to fix this, and if there is a problem on that in New York City, the problem is probably everywhere. So started the company with the mission to improve that experience. The idea is not great. It's a very difficult execution, though.
It's certainly, and on that point, to lay some foundation for perhaps also the uninitiated, we have a rather European audience here. They're thinking, Florian's talking about healthcare. It's not necessarily broken here. And what's the key difference that's in the United States where you're trying to solve the medical billing problem that you said was the bipolar problem in contrast to what you described as a very competent medical outcome?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is that in the United States, consumers pay out of pocket for healthcare around 10%. So entire healthcare in the US is a $4 trillion per year industry. And out of that, around $400 to $500 billion per year goes from the consumer directly to healthcare providers. So it's a huge amount. And just to put that into a perspective, these $400 billion, that's almost like US e-commerce minus Amazon. So it's a huge market.
And Michelle sees the same viewpoint in Canada. Of course, there's a national healthcare system. Perhaps it has its own issues. But to play devil's advocate a bit, Florian, a lot of the audience are thinking, well, the U.S. should just change its healthcare policies. And in fact, Florian, you might be in the way of that by alleviating some of the particular problems that they should address from a policy standpoint. So the question is, should entrepreneurs wade into what are perceivably moral dilemmas, where perhaps a policy change they think themselves should happen, but instead they solve it with a technological one? Your take, Florian?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, provocative comment, and really hear you on that. It definitely can make sense for some part. On the other side, which I would argue is the following: if we as an entrepreneur should only attack really problems we can influence, and I cannot even vote in the US, so my impact of influencing the government to change the healthcare system is probably not that great. So doing something that I can really influence, and that is, of course, alleviating some of the problems, I think brings the government rather to think, okay, private companies can solve problems much faster, much more efficient, and much more impactful than anything else.
It's certainly a good argument to make. And to pick up and dovetail right back into your plot arc, Michelle, you relayed the story of being on Dragon's Den, and certainly it wasn't even that long ago that you faced what seemed like a horrific wall and potentially having to give away a lot of equity for a small portion of the company. I just want to raise a hand because we can see you. We can see you out there. Who runs a startup and is tacitly looking for funding or would take money if they could? You can go ahead, raise your hands. We can see you. We can see you. That's a lot. What percentage is that, Michelle, that you see?
That's like half.
That's like half. That's like half. So yeah. So Clearco.com. Sign up. I'm actually not kidding.
But what you're seeing is it's a universal need, because you can do a lot to help founders. But ultimately, if you have a great business and great data, it should not be reliant on who you know, whether you get funded or not. And I think that that's kind of our mission, is to really democratize that access to capital, right? 40% of VCs went to Harvard or Stanford. So if you went to those schools, it's not hard to get funded. But if you are outside of that network, or if you have a slightly different product, it can be very, very challenging.
Right, and so one question on everyone's minds, and at Grit Daily, we get a lot of emails about these panel talks beforehand. They're like, ask Michelle this or that. It begs the question, Michelle, why hasn't everyone just followed suit with your model?
Well, I think we've seen this. I mean, we look at the U.S. Venture capital industry is $23 billion. We've put out $2.5 billion, right? To be 10% of an industry a couple of years in is like pretty crazy. And now we've seen little people pop up that are, building the Clearcos for Latin America or whatever it happened to be. And honestly, we think that's a good thing. We think that if this exists in more places around the world, more entrepreneurs will be able to get access to capital.
Certainly. So you see that as a good sign. They're not necessarily competitors, but there has been a cottage industry of copycats, and that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, I think it's better for the entrepreneurs, for sure.
Yeah, certainly. And And just unpack this black box that is Clearco, because we got a lot of questions on that. And like, is this thing a bank? It changed its name. It is Clearco now.
Yeah.
Let's walk through that mechanical process, because a lot of us have seen the ad. I have too. That just gets thrown at us on Instagram or Facebook.
Our targeting's working. So
probably yes, because I'm getting a lot of emails from startups.
Yeah.
You're right.
So let me explain this. So
Please do.
To get capital from us, you come in, you connect the apps that run your business. This is your payment processor, where you're buying your ads on Facebook or Google, your accounting data, and with that, we use AI to auto-generate a 20-minute term sheet for you. So in 20 minutes, you can see the amount of capital we can give you and the terms of that capital. We can get you funded anywhere between 24 and 48 hours, all the way up to $10 million. So that's way faster than any equity investor can do it. And the other nice part about it is we're just looking at your data. And so what that's meant is we've taken a lot of the bias out of these funding decisions. So, for example, we funded 8 times more women than the venture capital industry average. We funded founders in every state in America. It's the same in Europe. In the UK, 70% of our founders live outside of London. And 13% of our founders are BIPOC, compared to the industry average of 2.6.
So that's a huge discrepancy, or rather, sort of a delta.
Yeah.
Best way to certainly put that. And just so people understand the parameters, because we saw a huge raise of hands there, though. What are the boundaries on people can sort of get in that system and raise from you?
Yeah, I mean, we start companies very early, minimum of $2,000 of monthly revenue and 6 months of data.
So very little. You said 2,000 minimum.
Yep.
And 6 months of data.
And yeah, in one of the countries that we operate in, which is now most of Europe, US and Canada and Australia.
And among other sort of like perimeter on that, plays into a contemporary theme. Everyone sort of stayed at home the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And seems like they started like an online store or e-commerce business. Is that all that you focus on, or something else?
Yeah, majority of our companies are e-commerce stores, but anyone who's using ads to convert to sell their business. So that's B2B SaaS companies, that's mobile apps, and so it's a very wide range of different companies.
Certainly, we'll rope that right back into it. Sounds like you said earlier, wish you had that. You had Clearco. For Clearco in the last raise. We were listening, though. The limit, it's 10 million, so you need quite a few Clearcos, or have to wreck through that
Florian's
cap.
too big for me. So.
Yeah, certainly. And so inspiring stories, right? And the other question that sort of leads us into the next section of this talk, though, is about what are the limits of that, of changing the world? Certainly, it's venerable to fund startups more quickly, and more, and have super nerds build an algorithm, right, so that they're less biased to get funding. Or you had a personal incident with your family, Florian, a good medical outcome, but you saw a problem that you could jump and solve, right? If not you, then who? But what are the limits of that? Because it sounds almost political, like we touched on earlier. Should we, as startup founders, be thinking this is a vehicle for political change?
I think it's a very interesting question. So I think, first and foremost, usually startups, they address an industry that is serving somehow a market, but not in a very nice way. And I think Michelle's company does that very well. Clearco is basically disrupting traditional venture capital. Venture capital works for some sort of the market, but definitely not for 100% of the market, as it was before. And you see that everywhere. Startups usually go somewhere. And the original idea, I mean, like for you, funding startups is not that innovative. But the micro ideas of that, they're really transformational. And that's, for example, what we are doing as well. I mean, healthcare billing is definitely not something that is new. But what is new, that is you personalize all the billing. Everybody gets a different invoice at a different time through a different channel, making it very easy, simple, and convenient for people to pay. So I strongly believe that it's never over and innovation always happens. Right now, we are, of course, the challengers to this industry. But to be clear, in 10 years or so, the next set of groups of companies will come and challenge us. And they should, and they're probably here in the room, and I hope they're in the room. And I always say that I started this company to solve a problem and not to become a successful company. If there's any other company making us to go out of business and solving the problem in a better way, I will say absolutely, that was great.
Yeah, and certainly. So it sounds like one answer that you have, Florian, is they're certainly focused. But to galvanize around the question, there's a lot of passion there. You had a particular problem that you wanted to solve. Does that bleed into other areas of your own personal philosophy? For example, with climate change or particular interests of your employees. Should those be, and should startup founders think of those as opportunities for change using their startup as a vehicle?
I think 100%, because when you look on what are the stakeholders of a startup, I think the first, of course, are the customers and the clients, 100%. That's the reason. I mean, they're usually paying for it. Second are the employees. Employees of a company, they're basically putting their blood and their sweat into the company. And then I think the third is the community where the startup is getting in. So I think it is extremely important to see those three as your stakeholders and have as much impact as you can on all three of them. So ignoring one, I think, is absolutely not the right decision. However, on the other side, I also don't think that a company, in order to make really a lot of impact, should get involved in everything, because then you spread yourself too thin, you get defocused, and then you don't have a lot of impact on the topic that you really started the company. So in my opinion is pick a few bets, go very, very deep in them. You should open your mind for everything else as well, but you probably shouldn't act on everything, because then you split yourself too thin.
And do you agree, Michelle? She was shaking your head.
Oh, no, I was shaking my head in agreement. I mean, Ray Dalio has this incredible line in his book where he talks about how hard it is to impact change. And it's, make no mistake, I mean, if you devote your life to a single problem, you might have a shot at making a difference. And so that's really what we've been focused at Clearco. This is a big problem we're trying to solve. It's taking on venture capital. We think it's a big thing to solve if everyone that has an incredible idea has access to that capital. And so if we want to democratize access to capital, that actually means by definition, we can't get distracted with other things. And so we try to remain very apolitical on a ton of different issues. And that doesn't mean that employees can't advocate or I can't personally give to causes I care about. It means that as an organization, we are extremely focused in solving one problem so we can be successful in doing that.
Sure, and this is a quick question for both of you, because I got this a lot. I think it's a very good one, and that is, it's a problem, so they often have an end or a solution. When does it end for Clearco?
I don't know. We're going to get to hopefully 1 million founders funded and then keep going from there.
Sounds like a good goalpost. And Florian, what is the finish line for Cedar?
I think for Cedar, how it is today and our mission is when in the United States, every single patient can focus on getting healthy and don't need to be worried or concerned about paying for the healthcare.
Certainly venerable goals. That's all the time that we have for this panel. Really hope that you enjoyed yourselves. Again, I'm Jordan French with Grit Daily. Big round of applause for Florian Otto, Cedar, and Michelle Romanow, Clearco. And on our minds, Florian, your wife's okay, right?
She's doing better.
Okay.
She has a bad credit score right now, but good health.
Good health. I almost tripped you backstage. You're okay.
I'm great.
All right, we're all okay. Good luck, everyone, with your startups. Hope you enjoyed this talk. Enjoy the rest of Web Summit. Until next time.